So welcome again to the AMATYC 2014 webinar series, Measuring the World in Small Groups, Applying Trigonometry with David or Steve DeLong. And this presentation is sponsored by the Mathematics Intensive College Mathematics Committee of AMATYC. And AMATYC is the American Mathematical Association of Two-Year Colleges. And our core value is building expertise and exhibiting leadership in the teaching and learning of mathematics, enhancing personal growth, and improving teaching methods and effectiveness as a personally initiated lifelong responsibility. And for more information, you can visit our website at amatyc.org. And please note that the views expressed by the presenter are not necessarily the views of AMATYC, and any commercial products mentioned by the presenters are not endorsed by AMATYC. So now I'm going to switch it over to the presenter slides here. And once I do that, we're going to turn it over to Steve. So if you can welcome him in the chat room, that would be great. And I'm sorry about the little bit of a delay here in having your slides load, but here we go.
Okay, thank you very much, John. Let me just ask everybody now that I'm speaking, can you all hear me since I could hear John? So hopefully you can hear me. Okay, I see a couple of yeses, so that's good. Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming today. This is my first ever webinar. I've taught online for quite a few years and done seminars online, but this is my first crack at a webinar, so it's an interesting and rather intimidating experience. If it goes well, I'll recommend to all of you that you try it. And if it doesn't go well, then I'll discourage you from attempting it. So hopefully it will go well. But let me introduce myself. My name is David DeLong, and I go by Steve, which is my middle name. And I've been teaching college mathematics for about 21 years at the college and university level. And I've taught everything from developmental courses through the calculus sequence. And I can really tell you that I enjoy every level of math that I teach. Probably like many of you, it's not really the topic that's for me is the interesting part or the methodology, but really the actual act of sharing math concepts that I find valuable and stimulating and important. That and getting students interested and exciting about math. And I hope that, and I imagine that since all of you are in the math teaching biz, that you're also trying to do that all the time as well and trying to engage students and get them excited about our subject because quite many students seem to not really be all that enthused about math. That's not universal, of course, but many times we see students who just aren't all that much into the topic. The title of my presentation, as you can see here, is it's a little bit more involved, I guess, than what John had. And I apologize for the lack of capitalization. We noticed when we were setting up the slides yesterday that the font changed when they loaded it up into the Adobe room. And so suddenly most words are now in lowercase, oddly enough, including my name and including the title here. But it's Measuring the World in Small Groups, Engaging Students Through Community-Driven Group Assignments Using Applied Trigonometry. So it's a mouthful of a title there. And the photographs that are in the picture that are there, that's actually from one of the assignments that was submitted by some of my students when they were doing one of the group work assignments that I've got. And you can see that they were taking pictures of themselves doing measurements on campus and calculating angles and so forth. So when I say community driven, I'm referring to having students take their exploration of math concepts, and in the particular case that's on the screen right now, you can see they're talking about trigonometry, and that's what I'm talking about here today, out of the classroom and into the community. And by the community, I mean either the campus environment or their locality. In any regard, I'm talking about outside of the classroom. I don't pretend, by the way, this is a new concept. I'm sure that it's not original, but I think it needs to be stressed because quite uh, quite often I don't think many of us use external assignments in math classes. We usually sort of think about those as the applied physical sciences. Let me ask just as a question to throw out to everybody to get a reaction. Are there any of you who currently use assignments where you have students going out of the classroom into the community and measuring things and using them as assignments in your class? So let me just ask if any of you do that now. Oh, Virginia says yes. That's good. Oh, cool. So I'm glad to see it. So a lot of yeses. That's good. Sylvia says no. Oh, cool. Sylvia, I was hoping at least one person would say no. So that's good. Gonzalo says no as well. So that makes me feel a little bit better. So I'm not just speaking to everybody who's already done it. So that's good. Okay, excellent. Well, that's good. A lot of people have, a lot of people haven't. And I have to tell you, for many years I had done it and then I took a break for some reason. One year when I was doing work outside in the classroom, we had a very dry summer. It was during summer school, and I did a lot of writing on the sidewalks around campus. And I got a rather nasty note from the maintenance people telling me not to do that again because evidently people were tracking chalk all over the campus. And that was back in the days when we used chalk. But anyway, so there you go. The basic idea for my presentation really stems from my belief that math is actually a fun subject to study. I'm going to try a slide transition, so let's see if it works out here. Whoops, that was one thing that's just a core thing. Okay, the basis for my idea is that this presentation is really stemming from my belief that math is actually a fun subject to study. I think this gets past many students. They are sort of oblivious to that fact because most of them spend their time trying to minimize the amount of effort required to pass a math course. I think the key concept that motivated this talk and that I wanted to focus on today was to highlight the fun in math and to get the students involved. But unfortunately, I don't think many students actually want to be involved in math classes, at least not for the larger part. I was on a hike with an engineer last week, and he said that one of the things that he thought was dominant even among engineering students is that although they knew that they needed the math, they were always trying to economize their time in the subject and trying to do things in a more efficient way and minimize the amount of time they had to spend in math. So I thought that that was rather interesting sort of a thing to for him to say, especially because I always considered engineers to be the bread and butter ones who would really want to be in a math class. But what really got me thinking about this was the language that students use, and I'm sure that you've heard this as well. Students will tell us, "Well, I'm taking philosophy. Next term, I'm going to take biology. I want to take astronomy." And then you hear them talk about math, and they say, "Well, they're making me take math." I don't know if you've heard that around your campus, but over the years I've heard it more times than I could account. And it's the word "making me take math" that always kind of gets under my skin. But at any rate, I think that we can help the students to actually enjoy an assignment in our class while they're learning in a way that will allow us to be creative. Because I think that part of the thing that we want to keep going in our teaching is to have us be creative and innovative. We want to engage our students in the community in which we're teaching and to really provide students with some skills that they can and will use when our math class is a pretty distant and hopefully pleasant memory for all of them, because quite a lot of them might only be taking math and then using it tangentially in their career. So, what I've done in my class and what I want to keep doing, and what I'm going to try to address here today, is an important goal in the math class, and that's getting the students involved. Okay, so that's really what it is. I want them to realize that it's fun, and I want them to get involved. Okay. So here are my issues that I want to address to you today or present to you today. First of all, it's the problem as I see it. And a lot of what I'm going to say here may be preaching to the choir. And in fact, it probably is because we're all math faculty, I imagine. The second thing is why I feel that the problem actually is a problem. And that's something that's always worth discussing. Why, if it is a problem, why is it a problem? And my particular suggestion as to one way to address the problem, and that's really the point of the presentation, I suppose, and I'm looking forward to hearing your responses to it, how the students reacted to my idea, because I think that when you're thinking about doing something in class, it's always good to ask somebody who's done it before themselves, because you might want to find out if it's a dumpster fire before you get into it, because that would be a good thing to know. And the last thing that I want to talk about is the impact upon student learning that I have seen from this approach. Several years ago, I did a lot of work in assessment. And one of the things that I kind of took out of that, apart from the fact that I don't really like assessment that much, is the fact that I think that it really is important to measure the impact upon students about what we've done, because it really tells us if we're going in the right direction or if maybe we need to rethink something. Okay. All right. So let's start out with the problem. Okay. The problem, as I see it, is to engage students in the learning of math. And engagement, for me anyway, goes beyond the ransom of a grade being their inspiration. I don't want students to just do something because it's for a grade. I'm talking about getting them curious about the subject, enthusiastic, and genuinely interested. And I don't want to dwell upon it, but I do think that there is a certain lack of engagement among many of our students, but certainly not all. Let me ask you all, since I just want to involve you with some questions, I don't want to make them a poll or anything. Do you all feel that engagement is a problem, particularly in the lower levels of math classes that you teach? So, putting aside the engineering students, they probably are kind of involved. Paul says a major problem. Jenny says yes. Okay, so that's good. Well, at least I'm not alone. Sometimes I feel like I'm standing in the wilderness crying out, and everybody else is having these great classes where everybody is engaged, and I'm the only one that that my students just sort of sit there and stare at me. But still, uh, the thing that I've noticed is that the subject that we love, students really see it as dry. Okay, they can't relate it to the real world, whatever that is, and they can't seem to apply the concepts to problems that are outside of a contrived homework set provided by the author or through my math lab. I really have found over the last couple of years that students, well, last 20 years, I should say, students have a really hard time putting the math skills that I'm teaching them into use. You take it out of the section of the book that we're actually in at the moment, and suddenly they can't do it. Okay, and I find that sort of distressing. So that's the problem. I want to try and I've noticed that students are really not engaged, and they don't seem to be. Oh, and look at this. Sherry agrees. It's difficult to keep them engaged. That's exactly correct. And especially when doing the activities in the classroom, I found that in the classroom, if I try and do things in class, I lose too much lecture time. But that's just me. It's probably because I talk too much. So why is it a problem? Okay. Well, let's see. Lack of engagement, first of all, discourages students from pursuing a STEM degree. Okay, and this is something that I think is really important to point out. I did some research about this not too long ago, and I found, much to my surprise, because I started college in 1985, which is a long time ago. But anyway, I started college in 1985, and I have found that since 1985, the literature says that the percentage of bachelor's degrees in STEM fields has fallen by over 25%. That's really astonishing to me that the percentage of bachelor's degree in STEM fields has fallen by, oh, no, I'm not, Jane, but thank you for saying so, has fallen by 25%. That's crucial to me. I find that that's really disturbing. The other thing that I found is that there's great underrepresentation in STEM fields for what we might call challenged groups. I'm thinking about women and minorities and things like that. I think that they're really underrepresented. And some of the best work that I did in graduate school was with women graduate students. And I've found that the fact that I don't see many going into the STEM fields anymore, it really just seems to bother me. The fact that that's falling, so that's troublesome. So this is really what I think of as the problem. There's a lack of engagement that's discouraging students from actually taking part. We've got this growing shortfall of STEM graduates, and there's underrepresentation. I think that these are all significant issues. Okay. Now, third point about this presentation is how can we address the problem in general? Numerous initiatives are in place to enhance student engagement that are all over the place. You've heard probably about flipped classrooms and things like that. Right now, I'm preparing to do a partial flip of a classroom. Has anybody done a flipped classroom in math yet? Sort of making this kind of conversational. Has anybody done a flipped class? Gonzalo, perhaps that will be something that I will present then next term. So I will let you know. I'm going to do it partially because I want to dip my toe into the water, and I'll let you know how that comes out. So I'm a little bit concerned, but I will find out and I'll report back on conditions. Most of the initiatives that I've heard about that are trying to enhance student engagement are focusing upon the manner of content delivery. And I think that this is not really the problem. I don't think that how math is taught is the problem. And I may be in a minority about that. I'm sort of a traditionalist, and I really believe that lecture has its place. I think it's got a very valuable place. If it's done well and done properly, it can actually be a very effective way of teaching students. But I think that part of the answer lies in student activities beyond the classroom, outside of the classroom. And I worry about that. Sometimes the focus of presentation may be the latest fad in technology or else something that comes out of a college of education or something like that. And we could certainly have that conversation about whether or not we need to improve classroom use, but that's not a discussion for today. I want to talk about taking math beyond the walls of the classroom. That's to put even these fairly introductory students into. Whoops, John says I've wanted to try and always have been told it's easiest to start by flipping one lesson. That's what I'm actually going to flip 1 week, John. That's what I'm going to do this term. So I will let you know how it goes. All right. So I want to take the math outside of the classroom and into the real world. Okay. All right. Okay. Let me see. Right. Now, the motivation for taking material out of the classroom is pretty obvious, I think. I did some research and I found some things about effective studying. Learning is most effective when, first of all, it builds upon the knowledge of learners. Okay. It takes their existing knowledge, intertwines it with world experience, and combines that to solve new questions. Effective learning happens when we incorporate higher order questions that are challenging for the students. They involve collaborative tasks, and this is a key thing about this presentation I'm going to do today, that present interesting, intriguing, yet manageable hurdles for the students to cross. And I always find this to be a problem in lecture due to time limitations. And the last thing is that it encourages students to employ reasoning rather than answer getting, and also to demonstrate that reasoning. What I really want to do here is to construct what we might call in industry working groups of individuals to attack a problem with a gestalt approach. My thought is that if we could get students working in a group, they could combine their mental efforts together and then produce a really high quality product. So that's really what my motivation was for taking the material out of the classroom, because I wanted students to have a chance to interact with one another, apply their knowledge, feed off of one another in a sense, and come up with some answers to rather innovative questions. And I'll give you examples of these questions that I'm talking about in a little bit. Okay. So, to summarize what we've got going on so far, where I'm headed, my idea for attacking the problem of engagement in math classes is that students should be really asked to investigate and be active participants in their learning. I guess the popular phrase now is stakeholders. And then they should be confronted with real world problems, understand those problems, and then be able to disseminate their results. Because I think the dissemination is really a key thing. When I discussed this particular problem with my wife, she put it very well. So I'm going to steal her phrase. She's not a math teacher, but I liked the way that she put it. She said basically that we want to have our students be able to solve world problems and not word problems. And so I thought that that was a kind of a good way of putting it. And so I wanted to steal that phrase, but also give credit where credit is due for that one. Okay. So the first thing that I want to say is that let's get the students to participate, not just in a hand raising, call on me kind of a way, but actually to engage them in the serious development of understanding of the subject of mathematics, whichever field that we're talking about, trigonometry, algebra, calculus, anything that you're talking about. Okay. And have them accept accountability for what they're learning. I want to get them to think. Okay. And it's surprising how rarely students are actually asked to think in a math class and when solving math problems. When you stop to think about it, many of the problems they face in textbooks are laid out in a rather linear fashion for them. We're in the section on systems of equations, for example, and so suddenly they are faced with a problem. Here's some information. You can be placed into equations. You can form a system. If you need to, you've got some examples that you can mimic from the book. Now construct that system and solve it. That's not really thinking, I don't suppose. Certainly there's some thinking going on there, but really it's often obvious that students are just mimicking what they see in the textbook examples. And so I think that if we give them problems that are not related necessarily to what they're studying at the moment, that would be much more effective. The last thing that I want to talk about is getting the students moving. and incorporating things that they're enraptured by, something other than just a graphing calculator. Students are actually kind of bored with graphing calculators, I found, but they do get intrigued by things like apps and for their smartphone, and it's they can be used in genuine problem-solving efforts. I don't know if you can see this very well on the screen. This one that's right here is a little app that you can get for your phone that a student told me about that they use to get their angle of elevation for a problem that's coming up in this particular. Thank you, Sylvia. Because I was a little bit worried about how they would do the angle of elevation, and they actually figured it out with this app, and I didn't even know about it, but they told me that that was what they did. And I guess it's a level app of some type, but they were able to figure out what the angle of elevation was, and so I thought that was pretty cool. And I've given Carlos Hernandez the actual credit for it. He's the one who created this app. So essentially, what I'm talking about is kinesthetic learning. That's where the full involvement of a student's body is used to assist them in learning things and understanding things. So basically, the theory is, as I understand it, the more parts of their body that are involved in the learning process, the better off that learning is going to be. And so that's really what I'm after here in this process. Okay. So anybody with any questions of me so far before we get going? So before I actually talk about the whole solution that I came up with. Okay. Oh, thank you very much. I didn't know what it was, Luke. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. They just told me that it was a level app, and so that's what I looked up, and that's what I found. So thank you. Oh, this is Tilt Meter though. This was the Tilt Meter app. Okay. I just see somebody typing, so I'm just waiting. Oh, that's okay. They're probably similar things. They're probably similar things. Okay. So first of all, what particular types of questions should we be asking students? Okay, that's the thing that I want to actually be looking at because I think that if you've never done this before, and as I recall, there were several people who said that they hadn't done this sort of thing before. You might want to, or you might wonder, well, what sort of questions should we be asking students? That's oftentimes what daunts people from even trying this sort of thing, is what sort of questions should we ask? So that really stems from something that requires creativity for us, and I think that's kind of interesting. How is this different? How are these problems going to be different from word problems that are in a book? Well, for one thing, they shouldn't be section specific. They should actually kind of be presented way after we present material in the class, so the students have to look back over the vast spread of their knowledge to use it. Okay. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what's a realistic problem for students to do. I think most students think about a realistic problem as being a word problem from the book, but I don't think that those are terrifically great realistic problems. The trouble with the book problems is that the student probably already has an idea about what method to use to solve the question. And that's something that I wanted to try and avoid. So when you're looking at problems from a book, the students already have an idea about what method they're going to use because they're in a particular section of the book. If you've noticed, and if you're young at teaching, you probably have not really paid too much attention to this, but word problems in the book kind of disturb me because what happens is that when they are given to a student, the student is spoon-fed quite a lot of information. They're usually given a laundry list of facts, and they can use them to solve the problem. But in the real world, which I don't dabble in too much, but when you do go into the real world, typically that's not the case. You've got this problem to solve, and you don't have a clue as to where to start out, and nobody gives you any information. And if you want any information, you have to go out and actually find it if you can. Okay. And that's pretty rare that you can actually find information. So, or at least you can't find it easily. Let me give you a sort of a problem that I find personally. It's nice, I guess, for like a classroom thing, but for an assignment, I would never use it. So here we are. All right. A man stands 71 feet from a vertical tree and measures the angle of elevation to the top of the tree to be 31.8 degrees. How tall is the tree? That's a pretty common word problem from a trigonometry book. But the trouble here is pretty obvious. Where did all this information come from? I mean, it came from the sky. Suddenly we have all this information. The tree happens to be perfectly vertical, which is really interesting that we've got this vertical tree. Somebody told the guy the angle of elevation to the top of the tree. That was really nice of them. And he really doesn't have to do too much. So he just have to actually work it out and plug it into a formula. And that's not terribly interesting, I don't think, for the student. Now, what the problem is that I see with this is that it's patently contrived. Okay. All the information is given to the student without any suggestion about where they got it. And it's really kind of boring. It's what I'd call a word problem from the book. And as I said, we're interested in world problems, not word problems. And this once again goes back to the idea about how people learn best. Okay, most people learn best by doing something rather than reading about it in the abstract. I want to engage different parts of their brain, and that I think will enhance how they're going to learn. Okay, so the goal here is to get the students to participate, to get them to think, to get them to move, and to light a creative spark and to actually have some fun. And the students actually did have a lot of fun. I found when they were doing these assignments. Okay, so here's my idea about what I thought of when I wanted to create a laundry list about why I should engage students with these sorts of problems. So, first of all, the first thing that I decided upon was that students like to move around and they like to travel. Okay, that's traveling, even if it's around campus, they want to travel. Okay, and you'll probably find that with your students if you actually do it. The second thing, the students are actually interested in their environment. Oh, well, thank you very much, Pat. That's great. Thank you. They actually want to learn about their environment and their locale. That's might not seem obvious to you, but they actually do. The third thing that I decided on was that students don't want to be embarrassed. Now, remember that we're talking about teenage girls and boys. If you're teaching to traditional students, and image is really everything to these people, don't do anything that you think students might be embarrassed by or that they won't think of as cool, because if that's the case, they're not even going to do it. Nobody wants to be embarrassed, especially not students. And despite initial protests, students actually like working in groups. Do not listen to students if they tell you that they don't like working in groups. As long as the groups are pretty small and you're in a class where they all are dependent upon one another, they actually wind up liking working in groups. And that's because it takes some of the pressure off. When they're in a group and they don't have to know it all, they can actually bounce ideas off of one another. And if they get stuck, there's somebody whose shoulder they can cry on and that kind of stuff. So they actually do like working in small groups. So don't listen to them if they say, I hate working in groups, because that's not true. And the last thing is that students really like technology. They really want to learn about technology and see what their gadgets can actually do. It's surprising that if you've never had students actually do something more than just basic graphing with their calculators, they get stunned when they get told what your calculators can do. And when you start to show them apps that they can use on their smartphones, they really get engaged and excited. And that's something that I think is really kind of cool. Okay. So, are you ready to see a sample sort of a problem that I did? So I'm ready, just about to show you a sample problem. I'll tell you how the assignments are set up, and then I'll show you some sample problems. So we all ready for some sample problems? Sherry says, "Bring it on." You sound like a student. There you go. Bring it on. Okay. So there we go. Let's try it. Oh, yeah, Cecina, that actually happened to me too. The students told me afterwards, because they had to do a report to me, that they really liked it. And that was something that I was a little bit worried about, because at the start they told me they hated it. So I didn't know what to do. But here was the assignment. Students were divided into small groups, and each group was given a list of realistic problems to solve, but no numerical information about those problems. None of the groups had the same questions, so they couldn't cross contaminate. They had to work within their own groups. They had a strict time limit. I gave them a week to do this. Documentation of the process and results had to be submitted along with a class presentation or video. So, in other words, I gave them some problems, gave them no information about how to solve them, no suggestion about what to do. I gave them a time limit. So it was just like they were out there in the real world and they had a project assigned to them by their boss. I said, look, I need it next week. No excuses. I need it then. And I told them that I wanted them to document stuff. So, in other words, I wanted them to be taking pictures of themselves doing the work, doing the measurements, so that I could be convinced that everybody was there and doing their part. And I also wanted a report from the students that summarized all of their results, because I think that it's important that they learn to write about what they've learned and explain what they did. And also, they had to do a presentation. And if they didn't want to do a presentation, I told them they could get by with a video, but it had to be available for their peers to look at. And actually, what I got at the end surprised me what the great creativity that the students had. They really enjoyed that part almost as much, I think, as getting out there in the real world and solving the problems. They really liked the fact that they learned about PowerPoint, even that they didn't have. They learned about things like Camtasia and so forth, and how they could actually create really interesting videos. So they learned a lot through these projects, and I was really pretty proud of them. And I gave them some help with the Camtasia, by the way, if they didn't know anything about that. And I also told them how to make videos using PowerPoints if they wanted to do like slide presentations. And so I helped them with that part if they needed that sort of a leg up. But here's an example of the sort of problem that I had. Okay, now this, if you are not familiar with the area, don't worry about it. This is actually from a place in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And the question was, I gave them this overhead picture of a place called Rudy Inlet, and you can see the jetties extending out from Rudy Inlet into the water. And I asked them, how far apart are the points at the tips of the jetties at Rudy Inlet? Now, if you go there, you find out that there are all sorts of obstacles to getting out there. You're not permitted to go out on those rocks that are out to the jetties. They are sort of blocked off by signs and barricades and so forth. The students have no real information about the problem, but they are aware of what it is. It's a local structure. They know about its location. They know what a jetty is, but they don't know anything more. Okay. And they were interested because it was an actual physical thing that was in their location. Okay, I also gave them assignments where they had to go to, where they had to go like around to different places in campus. Okay. Another problem that I gave was this. This was when I was teaching in ski country. What's the elevation difference from the top of the ramp, from the top of the launch point at the Howelson Hill practice ramp, and what's the launch angle at the base? Okay, so that's another problem that was a local feature that the students knew about, but they had seen all over the place, but they actually hadn't thought about it very much because it was just something they saw every day. It was something that suddenly it was had faded into the background for them. And this is one of my favorites because it's in my hometown. How tall is the sculpture of flying geese in downtown Fort Collins? And you notice that there is it's iced over right now, but there's a sort of a moat around that statue. They can't get to it and actually measure it. So all of these things present them with things that they can do, but they are obstructed from measuring them directly. And this is why it was a trigonometry class. But you could do things that were like this in college algebra classes and calculus and so forth. These questions all actually meet the criteria that I was talking about. They get the students to move, in this case off campus, but I had problems that were on campus as well. Let's see, they involve iconic things in the students' local environment, and this is something students actually are genuinely interested in. And I think we all have things in our localities that we could use. You probably have buildings and murals and all kinds of things like that, bridges. The act of solving the questions doesn't force the students to do anything embarrassing or risky. Okay, that was something that I was worried about. And they all require several individuals to do. Nobody could do this on their own, actually, because they had to be documenting what they were doing and they had to be taking measurements. And so I wanted to have them actually working together. And I want to pause here and mention, by the way, that the students were reluctant to get involved at first, but once I got them going on the project, the collaboration that they engaged in was really surprising and exciting. And I'll talk more about that later. But what was very interesting was that when it came to any of these problems, I typically heard from students who, at first, when I gave them the problem, they didn't say much at first, but then I heard from them. Probably within about a day or two, I heard from the students. And it wasn't too good at first. So let me show you an example of an email that I got from a student. And you can see it came to me, and it's about the Rudy Inlet problem. And the student wrote, Professor DeLong, my group is under the impression that we are expected to go to Rudy Inlet, climb out onto the rocks ascending out of the inlet, surrounded by signs forbidding such a thing, and somehow measure the opening of the inlet. Can you please shed light onto the truth of such a thing, as I do not own a boat and fear my name being on the evening news of accidentally drowning after a mishap at the inlet? And he was being a little bit sarcastic, I think, but you can tell that it was one of those things that he was basically trying to cop out on it, and he really didn't have an idea, and he was taking the easy way out. And so I wrote back to him a pretty terse message. I said, well, his name was Tyler, and I said, Tyler, you shouldn't have to venture out on the rocks to answer this question. Think back about all the things that we've covered in the math class, and you know enough to solve this thing, so solve it. And he wrote back with a pretty terse okay message, and I didn't hear back from him after that. So I think that I might have disgusted him with that, but he wound up being able to solve the problem. So once he did that, they worked on it and they figured it out. Okay. So how did the students react to the questions? Okay, first of all, initial resistance and a bit of frustration. That email was like one of the kinder little tidbits that I got. Some people were actually a little bit angry at first until they realized that the message was not going to go away, or the problem was not going to go away. Also, they did not like the fact that they were separated from their friends. I intentionally created the groups in such a way that they did not have friends in their groups. And that was something that I wanted to be sure of, because I figured that a stranger is just a friend that you've never met. So I wanted to get them out there and working with some people that they had not ever worked with before. After that, there was some acceptance. Okay. And then after that, there was actual enjoyment of the problem. So the resistance period was really pretty brief. Students are generally pretty pragmatic. And after they realized I wasn't going to back down from this and that they were stuck with the idea, they had to actually live with it. After that, there was really enjoyment, as I say. A couple days after I signed it, when I was erasing the board, I had my back to the students, so I could hear them talking to one another in the classroom, and they were talking about working around their work schedules, aligning times to get together, and doing measurements. I heard a lot of things like, I was thinking about number 3, and I've got an idea how we might get started on it. And that was really what I wanted. I wanted to have the students be engaged and interacting with one another and sort of being in a work group where they would combine their ideas and bounce ideas off one another and really collaborate. I found that it was realistic, dynamic, engaging, educational, everything that I wanted it to be. So believe me, if you haven't tried it before, those of you who already have, I think you would probably agree with me. It really creates an energy in the classroom that I strongly recommend. So I would really recommend that you do it. For those of you that have done it so far, whoops, how often do you give these problems? Sylvia, every semester I do it, but typically it's late in the term, and so I give them a group assignment that comes usually about, I think it's 75% of the way through the course. So I do it once a term because I like to get it late in the term, because that way they have a lot of ideas and they have to figure out which ones to use. Because if I do it early in the course, then they don't know enough, and also there's a limited field for them to choose from. Once we had gotten like late in the course in trigonometry, first of all, the weather got better so they could go outside. And second of all, they had a lot of different topics that we'd gone over, so they didn't know which ones to do. By the way, the ones who had to go to Rudy Inlet told me that when they were working on this on that problem about finding the points between the jetties, a bunch of girls came up to them and asked them what they were doing, and so it actually turned out it would be a socialization sort of a thing. And I think that they enjoyed that a lot because it allowed them to sort of show off in front of some girls and explain what they were doing, and I think that they liked doing that at the end. So that's always good if you can do something that's kind of cool. And so by the beach, I guess it was a good thing. So all right, so let me see here. Switch to the next slide. Yes, I agree. It was a nice benefit. Okay. Okay. An aspect of the assignment that students found very useful was the idea of a summative report and presentation. I insist on the students creating a report and giving a presentation about what they did. I think that that's extremely important. It's something that we don't do in math often enough, have students actually speak. And that's because I think that when they go on, if they're going to major in any field really that gets them out into the public life, they're going to have to eventually speak to people about stuff. And I think that it's important to get them talking about something that's a little bit technical and something that they need to present information to other people. I think that that's extremely valuable. So if you decide to do this, I strongly recommend that you include a report from the students, and if you have the time, a physical presentation, and if not, a video. The videos students really liked because they could build music into it and things like that. And I think that that's a very useful skill. We can really cross barriers into other disciplines and get them to do things that are actually very helpful that they can use in other classes. I think that that's very useful for students. I wanted to talk to you about the impact upon understanding, and this is really the point where we can close down what my discussion is. But nothing I don't think is worthwhile until we actually discuss how it affected student learning. And this is what I found over year to year. So Sina, the students loved it. I recommend it very strongly because some people don't like to talk in public. I think some people do, but some people don't. But they all seem to like videos, so they loved making videos. So I strongly recommend that. So this is what I found. Student performance on examination application problems actually rose by 26%. Now, admittedly, it's a fairly small sample size that I've got going on right now, but I did see that in the similar problems to the applications that we had in the group work, that the students actually understood them much better. Their performance rose by 26%. Students on my tests, I always have them try to explain. I give them a how would you solve this sort of a problem. Their performance on those increased by 34%. I thought that that was very, very interesting that their ability to explain how to approach problems was markedly improved. I think that that's kind of interesting. If you never test students on sort of abstract questions about how to sort of questions, I find those questions very valuable. And I found in the past that they didn't always do so well, but their performance has jumped on that since I've done these projects. And through SurveyMonkey, I did ask everybody what they thought so they could say it anonymously. And 90% of the people expressed enjoyment of the assignment. And so that to me, I thought was very powerful that since most people seem to not like math problems in general, and they claim to not like word problems, that to me was very, very interesting that the students liked it to such a strong degree. So, as I said at the beginning, I wanted to assess how it turned out. So, that was what I found. So, in closing, I'd like to point out that why I feel these problems are important. First, I think it's important for students to understand and be confronted by problems that aren't taken from a textbook, where all the information is given to them. I want them to examine things and investigate. I want them to be able to become participants and be active in their learning. I think that that's really important. And lastly, I really can't tell you how much I emphasize and how much I believe in having students present their results, share their results with all of us, because I think that talking about math and believing in themselves, I do too, Debbie. Thank you. I think that being able to be confident enough to present their results, that's something that I think is extremely valuable. So that's all that I had. So I'm going to throw the field open to questions. So does anybody have any questions that you have for me on this bright, shiny day? Thank you, Giannis. What kind of issues did groups have? The issues, Sherry, that I ran into at the beginning were scheduling. That was something that was difficult. One group I had to extend by a couple of days because in my groups, in my classes, I have a mix of traditional and non-traditional students. And so the issues that the students had were really about timing, getting together and working around work schedules because they all had to participate. And so there was one group that I saw the first time that I did this that begged me for extra time because people were working. And that was really the only issue that I really ran into. All the problems were designed such that they could definitely solve them. They had to be clever in some cases, but they had to solve them. And they were able to, but time was usually the issue. Okay, the time to get together. It was all outside in class, Sherry. I did not surrender any of my lecture time for planning. I did not surrender any of it. Oh yes, they got a grade absolutely, Cecina. My belief is that students won't do anything if they are not being graded for it, and they won't take it seriously. I treated it like a test. That was what it was. Debbie, yes, they were all successful. There were some people who did not participate in their groups. If that's what you're thinking about success, if somebody was not demonstrated as participating, they got a zero. So I was very strict on that. Though, Sherry, that was what I was just mentioning. If somebody did not show up, they got a zero. That was a necessity. I was not going to allow anybody to coast on the coattails of anybody else. You got to show up and you got to pull your weight. And students appreciated that, believe me, because I had one group that emailed me that somebody didn't show up and what was going to happen to them and were they going to get the points for the work. And I said, they're getting a zero. And that made the group quite happy. Nobody complained about that, Sherry. Nobody complained about the transportation issues. They all worked that out among themselves, and it didn't seem to be a problem. So we live in or I'm at a commuter college, and so everybody has cars, and they all have access to cars, and there's public transportation that's available. Okay, and I made sure that all the places that they were being asked to were close enough that they could fairly easily get there through public transport if they needed to. So that's a good question. If you really live out, if you're teaching way out in the sticks, that could be an issue, I guess. But there's always campus. I mean, you could always have them do things around campus. Nobody complained about it though. One of my favorite groups was the one that took their dogs out with them, and in their pictures, the dogs are there for participating in the measurements. Just waiting to see if there's any other questions. I see multiple people are typing. Oh, John closed me out. Ah, excellent, Pat. Teach online as well, and so I think that that's an interesting thing to do. Okay, to because they like to share it on YouTube. Oh well, thank you, Sherry. I hope that you use it. I'd love to see how folks do when they apply it. I think it's a great idea. It's lots of fun, believe me, and I really like the way the students learn from each other and work together. It was great. Well, Joe, that would be something that you'd have to think about what topic that you were looking in. I did a nut mixture thing that where I actually had them. One of the things I don't know if you've done that thing in the word problem, um, in the when you have a word problem, like when you're doing a system and you have them doing a mixture of nuts and different food type things. I asked them to go and actually document how much things are in like a store and stuff like that, and then create like a mixture and show me how they're going to work out with the prices and all that sort of thing. It depends upon the topic that you're looking at. I've also had them do like paths of projectiles where they're photographing the projectile in motion, and they have to actually overlay a grid onto it and model the motion of the object. So they have to actually like video it and then overlay it onto a grid. And that one drove them nuts. By the way, is trying to learn how to set up their camera correctly, but they got it. So good question. Anybody else? John, I don't see anybody writing anymore, so I think that I'm
Oh yes,
just about
well,
ready to hand it over.
uh, let's thank Steve again in the chat room for the great presentation again today, and thanks to all of you for participating in today's AMATYC webinar. And if you'd like to support future AMATYC webinars, please consider becoming a member of AMATYC at bit.ly/join-AMATYC.
And thank you,
And
everybody. By the way, since it went fairly well, I'll recommend to do a webinar. It was fun.
oh, oh
So
yes, I
thanks.
think it actually was very great, Steve. And let me go through a few other quick notes, and then if you all want to ask Steve some more questions, that would be great as well. But please remember to like AMATYC on Facebook at facebook.com/AMATYC. And recordings of past AMATYC webinars can be found at bit.ly/AMATYC-webinars, and it typically takes us 1 to 2 weeks to produce and upload webinars to this archive. And I know a few of you messaged me saying that you had problems with sound today, so if you could go there to check for the full recording with sound, that would be great. And again, that will take us 1 to 2 weeks. And if you could please take 2 minutes to evaluate the webinar content and the presenter today at bit.ly/AMATYC18, that would be great. And if you need an email confirmation of your participation in today's webinar, just please fill out the optional section at the end of the evaluation, and I will make sure that you get your certificate for participation today. So again, if you could thank Steve in the chat room, that would be great. And if you have any questions, I think that Steve would be willing to stay on a few more minutes. And I'm going to end the recording again. So thanks again to everyone for your participation today.